Hello, everybody. Welcome to UNtracing Trauma. I'm your host, JeGaysus, and I have a very special guest, Danielle. You may have seen her on TikTok as In Bed with Danielle, a clinical sex therapist. And before I introduce her, let's just get to the what do you call them? House cleaning notes. So I wanted to housekeeping. There you go. Thank you. Ignore my bed. I'm doing laundry. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has joined as a YouTube member. I know we just launched that last time you were here. And if you want, there's like emojis and you get badges and stuff in the chat. So that's pretty cool. And I want to shout out to them and my patrons. So let's go through it as quick as we can. So we have Megan F, Bart, Just Cuz, Adele S, Katie, Amy B, Kat L, Arget, K, Anna, Crystal, Candy, Carol, Claire W, Claire G, Gina, Goth Barbie, Fraudy Chick, Heather C, Cleet C, Modern Day Masquerade, Jubilee, Mary, and then we have Crystal D in the YouTube, and also No, Freya, Zaddy, and then the two patron saints, Brianna, and of course the disciple Bartholomew. Thank you all for supporting my channel. I love it. And yes, quick disclaimer up front. So the show is called Untracing Trauma. We will be having probably more sex-steered conversation because of the guest this week. So just if you are uncomfortable around those sort of topics, I want you to be aware up front and you can skip to the next episode. If you are wanting to listen to the audio version, you can always find us on the Apple, Spotify places. And with no other ramblings to go off of, let us start. So hi, Danielle. Thank you for being here. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do currently and just give us a quick rundown?
Sure. So I'm a sex therapist and clinical sexologist. So what that means is that I am a licensed mental health practitioner. So I do therapy, but then I do part-time. What I say is I do part-time clinical, part-time research. So half of my work is clinical work with my patients. The other half of my work is like research. I do a lot of consults on politics and policy. I've had a lot of people comment recently like, oh, you haven't been all over TikTok. And I'm like, I don't know if you heard, but the FDA and the whole mifepristone case came down. So I have that, and Florida just had a 6-week abortion ban. So one of my research specialties is abortion care and access in the U.S., which links very closely with Christianity. So I've been very, very busy doing that. So I do work with that research-wise, and then clinically I specialize in religious trauma, AFAB, healthcare, and sexuality and LGBTQ plus care.
Love that. Yeah, I just for the promo, I just did a video where you're talking about how you're focusing on helping women and queer people specifically in your practice more so than helping men through their things. I posted that here on YouTube, and while I didn't get any views on TikTok, we got 90 views in 2 hours. The YouTube comments have been very bro-y. A lot of men do not like you saying that. And I was like, she can do whatever she wants.
Yeah, so this is what I always tell people is it's called private practice. So you get to take whatever patients you want, and you get to say no thank you to whatever patients you want. And the other thing is, here's the thing, guys, I specialize in vulva care, right? Like vulvas, vaginas, that kind of sexual pleasure. So if you are a cis het man, like I specialize in LGBTQ plus care, right? Queer sexuality, ways to have affirming sex, non-binary sex, trans sex, all those kinds of things, right? But if you're a cis het man having just general basic hetero sex, there's a whole host of other clinical sexologists out there for you that specialize.
So many.
So go to them and stop complaining that this one human that you don't want to see anyway doesn't want to see you.
Oh yeah, there's no way those types of people would be seeking you out specifically. Let's be honest. Right. So I was saying before we started, usually I go through a rundown of people's background history and religion just to get a base of where you came from, or I guess I don't want to say what moral standings you have. That's totally the wrong way to word that. What morals were impressed onto you, imprinted. So would you mind if you start, were you raised religious in Christianity or any other religion?
Yeah, so I went to Catholic school my entire life, like was through from kindergarten all the way even through college, I guess, even through my bachelor's degree. I went to a Catholic,
Really?
yeah, university. Now, once I got to college, obviously things were a lot more like loose on the campus. It was a private Catholic college, but it wasn't in any way like a strict, it was Creighton University in Nebraska. So it wasn't in any way like super, super strict.
But they had
We
like
were
a
definitely,
sex psychology route in a Catholic school?
they nope, they did not. I had to go
Oh.
back for that. Yep. So they did not. I did psychology. I did general psychology there, and then clinical psychology. And so I had to go back for the PhD in clinical sexology to put on top of all that. But I was raised Catholic, never subscribed to it. I always tell people now I'm like, I'm Jewish, but like Jewish, like Jewish.
Jewish
Like I
on the
don't eat
blood
pork.
inside.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't eat pork, I don't eat shellfish. Our hair matches, yours and mine.
Yeah.
Um, but like outside of that, I don't follow any kind of religious code whatsoever. But I did grow up in that very strict purity culture. You know, Judeo-Christian is very linked together, like those belief systems,
Yeah.
depending on, you know, which flavor of Christianity or Judaism you're going for. But so I was really raised in that kind of faith community, if you will. And so purity culture was definitely something that was part of my life growing up.
Yeah. And so you said that you were never subscribed to it, like personally. So I'm assuming this would have been your parents' choice to put you in Catholic school.
So my mom's choice, very specifically, and I always kind of joke with people. I'm like, you know, my dad sort of saved me, and like, love to mom, but my dad sort of saved me in a way because he's not religious at all. So
Yeah.
we would learn this stuff like at school, right? And they would be like, you can't have sex before you're married. It's gonna ruin you. You're gonna be, you know, blah blah. And then my dad would be like, okay, but like low key, that's bullshit. Like that's not true. And your mom and I totally slept together before we were married. And I was like, so my
Scandalous.
mom would be like, no, you absolutely, these are the rules. My dad would be like, all right, real talk though.
That is so funny. No, it repeats. I think I see this pattern again and again and again on my podcast specifically, where the dads are generally like, I'm just here. You know, they have this kind of laissez-faire attitude about it. They're like, well, your mom really believes. It's similar to
Yep.
my life. That was the same experience I had, without the Catholic guilt part, but I had the evangelical guilt part. So did that have any play into like why you decided to go into like sex therapy and clinical sex research? Was it like because of the purity culture you saw throughout?
Yeah, I think that was a big piece of it. So when I was younger, I was always really interested in sex and sexuality. I was always really interested in like that human connection. I was always really interested in psychology as well.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom likes to joke. I remember this as well. I read Cosmo like every teenage girl does. Um, and like at the time, there was an article in there from a sex therapist, and I brought it to my mom, and I was like, I think I want to be a sex therapist. And she was like, you'll never make enough money. There's not enough clientele for that. Like, be something else. So at the time, I think I was probably like 12, 13, 14. I wanted to do that then. It wasn't
Wow.
until I know, right? Wild. Thinking
You're
back.
12 and you're like, I see a problem with the Kinsey report. I think I can fix that.
Yeah. Well, and just like you knew the stuff that they were telling you in school was I also really wanted to go to med school at one point. Obviously went psych route, so it was adjacent. But
Yeah.
my dad was a paramedic as well, and so he was always like there were medical books all over the
Oh,
house,
okay.
right? Like everywhere, all over the house, there were medical books. So sometimes we would learn stuff in school, and they would be like, you know, sperm can fit through a condom, and I would be like, that's not true. Like objectively, that's not true.
Yeah.
So just stuff like that would pop up, and I'd be like, I think that's bullshit.
You're
So
going
it
home
wasn't
and fact
until
checking it in the books, being like,
like I know I read this.
well, your penis actually fall off the first time. What? No, the nun said that everyone will have sex and die.
Right. Well, and you know, like being a teenager, did we not all find like if we had medical books or you went to the
Oh
picture of the
yeah,
penis?
I had an encyclopedia set, and you best believe we only had like in through Q, but the first thing I ever looked up in an encyclopedia was straight to the penis because they had
Right.
diagrams.
Exactly. Like a cross section and everything. So that's kind of, I was always really interested in like fact checking stuff. I'm still that way as an adult, very annoyingly. Like I'm always
No,
like,
that's
let me Google
good. The
that.
fact check is good.
Like my ADHD brain, like I know we share that. And so I'm always like, I have to rabbit hole that for a moment. Um, so I was always really interested in that stuff, but it wasn't until I got to college and I got to take a gender psychology class and a gender and sexuality class and a human sexuality class that I was like, oh, this is probably what I'm going to do.
Love.
And I don't think I had the words for religious trauma at the time. It wasn't until I went to graduate school the first time that I decided that like religious trauma was the word for this experience that I had. And I don't think it was until like the late 2000s that we really started to notice how harmful purity culture was. And a lot of that research started to come out. And so that's right around the time that I was getting out of grad school the first time and becoming a practicing clinician. And so I was just really intaking a lot of that. And so I treated religious trauma for a while before I was like, I need to go back and do the PhD thing all over. And I need to get like human sexuality because there was just so much crossover between religious trauma and sexual dysfunction.
Yeah. Okay, so you started as, I guess, just like a general psychologist therapist then before you delve deeper into the sexuality part? Oh, interesting.
Yes.
And I love that you said that. It really did take till the early 2000s for people to be like, when it comes to purity culture, and I forgot, like, it was so prevalent in the 90s, like, it doesn't matter if you were in church or not. Like, you would see it on 90210 and you would watch, the Jonas Brothers on the early aughts, and they would have an entire episode for that short-lived Disney Channel show about their purity rings that they were always so vocal about in interviews. And like it was just like a given that was like the norm in the 90s, and then all of a sudden people, I guess, like woke up and were like, wait, what are we doing here? And I don't know if you have any insight into that, but what was like the specific, if you could nail it down into like a zeitgeist moment, where did the world decide maybe purity culture isn't great in terms of psychology? When did they start investigating and doing studies?
So I really think that a huge, something that really catapulted this was the Me Too movement, which then later brought about the Church Too movement, because I think that there were a lot of people that were coming forward and saying, I was sexually assaulted. And at the time, and this is super, super common in therapy as well, people will be like, it took me years to understand that I was assaulted.
Yeah.
And people look at that and they're like, that makes no sense. It does if you were raised in purity culture and you're taught that you're completely responsible for men's sexual behavior. And if you are a young boy that went through purity culture, right, and you were assaulted, you just kind of have to stay silent about it and pretend it didn't happen. Yeah. So a lot of people started coming out of the woodwork, and people are kind of like, how do we have this huge issue? And then Church Too, Emily Jo Allison brought about Church Too for us. And that brought forward a whole bunch of people that were like, yeah, I was assaulted in the church. And we began looking at essentially what research did was like, this can't be an anomaly, right? Like something's going on here. What teachings here are toxic that really allow this to fester and build? Because at a point that you have such a clearly systemic issue, right? Yeah. We can't say that it's an individual person. We have to say the doctrine is toxic.
It's built
in.
And
the doctrine is purity culture. Exactly. It's built into the church. It's baked in like with that cookie. You can't separate the sugar once it's baked.
And so I've always, I have no proof or studies behind this, but I've always said purity culture has a direct link to the, like you were just saying, the sexual assault cases we see now. And even now there's more and more coming out, I feel, than there was in the past decade between the Southern Baptist papers and someone else just released another study. I think it was like the Presbyterians released their list or something. But I've always said that because of purity culture and the way in which it was taught, it has a direct impact on the people it was being taught to, aka people my age, people your age. Then they were raised watching this, and it specifically groomed, if you will, it groomed the next generation of pastors who were people who sought power, who sought manipulation, and they saw this as a way that they could target victims. And so I'm not saying all pastors are power hungry and crazy, but there's a good chunk in this generation that specifically sought out that kind of power as a direct result of purity culture being taught to them. And they saw an in, and they saw an easy way to get victims. And I can't prove that, but that's how it feels.
Absolutely. I think it's also, because you were saying like it kind of grooms the next generation of pastors. I think it goes, we can even take it more macro, like systemically, right? It groomed an entire generation of AMAB people, and particularly men who like act in sexually assaultive ways, right? And feel justified. So I'm sure you've seen, I can't recall the church, but it was a Southern Baptist church. And at one point, it was a grown woman who came forward and said, this man assaulted me when I was like 16 or 14 or whatever. And everyone stood up and just prayed for the pastor, right? And they're like, oh, this poor man, he's struggling, right? We literally
have a link all about that on my videos. It's called Pastor Called Out, I think, but I reposted that here on YouTube actually, because I thought everyone should see this. And yeah, no, the church had his back. It was ridiculous. Like they were so hurt for him that he had these struggles in the past, if you will. And it's like they escorted her out of the church. Like she didn't even, I mean, I wouldn't have stayed, but they literally just walked her out and were like, hey, bye. And then he got all the support and love and hugs and prayers for like, oh, please forgive him. We all forgive him. You should too.
Yeah. So like I think it's a catch. It's two ways, right? It's one of the ways is just like what you said. I think having a power structure like that, where you have built-in excuses for men who act terribly, and you tell them that it's not their fault, that's going to draw men that are already power hungry, that already want that power and control, that are already going to do bad things.
Yep.
And then we also groomed an entire generation of boys and men to believe that like that power and control is their birthright as well. And so they're seeking this, and they believe that they have this God-given power over women and girls anyway. And so we have all of this, but then there's also definitely a subset of men who truly believe this, who truly believe like, I am just at the mercy of my lustful thoughts. And like, this woman tempted me, by the way, the woman's like 14. Exactly. I can't help myself. And then when we say all men, right, like they'll sit there and they'll say it's all men. They'll be like, oh, all men are this way. All men are lustful. All men want to rip your clothes off. And then you're like, oh, so it's all men. And they're like, shut up. You can't say that. And you're like, oh, okay. It's only okay when you say it. Got it. Cool.
I feel like that is a perfect transition point. We do groom them to be like that. And the thing is, like you're saying, they will admit it's all men, and you can even see it in pop culture tropes, right? You look around, and how many movies or how many shows show the overprotective dad over his virginal daughter, and there's always the, you know, talk of you need to watch out for men. They only think about one thing, and you can't be too close or friends with a guy because they only have one thing on their mind. And like, no, dad, he's really nice. We just like hanging out and playing cards for now. But in his head, I was thinking it when I was a teenage boy. I know what he's thinking. And so it's everywhere. That's the thing. And we were talking earlier before we got on about compulsory heterosexuality. And I think that right there is a good segue into kind of speaking more about that. Can you explain for the audience what compulsory heterosexuality is defined as?
So compulsory heterosexuality is the idea that heterosexual sexuality is essentially the baseline. It's the core. That is the only correct and right way of being. And everything else from there is deviant, right? Is wrong, or at least different. And where you fall on that spectrum is really dependent on like someone's personal belief systems, right? Like obviously the Christians think that anything outside of that is an abomination. It's horrible. It's sinful. And that can go anywhere from there all the way to people just thinking like, oh, well, gay people are different, or heterosexuality is the norm and gay is the abnorm or the different, right? So we can go anywhere on that spectrum. But the general concept is that heterosexuality is the accepted norm, and everything else other than that, like, by the way, monogamous. It's generally monogamous,
Yes.
one cis het man, one cis het woman, and this is the norm. And everything outside of that is abnormal, apparent, different, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same reasoning where back in the day they used to say that being gay was a disease, or now, especially, they're saying being trans is a disease, because it's seen as even if it's accepted as biological, even if the scientists and then obviously the lay people of the world underneath them accept, like, oh, we were born this way, they still see it as a dysfunction, as something that you were born, you have the norm, heterosexual cis person, and then all of a sudden, what? You're gay? Genetically, something must have been wrong. Like, kind of how there's any other genetic disease. Your your genes got twisted in the womb. When there's no proof otherwise of that. But it's also fascinating the way that sexuality in general is considered that. Like, you can go past even the heterosexuality part and look into, well, I guess, yeah. But like, as an asexual person, there's also the implied nature that everyone is sexual, and that you're either going to be the norm or you're going to be a deviation from the norm, which will be gay or bi. And then nobody even talks about the non-sexual part of it. They just assume there will be sex. It's just, are you going to be in the group or in the minority group? And leave out that whole entire thing because sex is so prevalent, I would say. I mean, obviously, like, that's how evolution works. But compulsory heterosexuality makes very little room to even start processing what the different forms of sexuality or amount of sex drive even look like, because it's just assumed to be a cookie cutter, start here.
Yeah, everybody gets put in a box is the issue. Like, purity culture puts everybody in a box. Male, female, woman, man, and then you have characteristics that you match from that. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've unpacked a lot with clients in therapy, particularly with AMAB and clients who are men, clients who were, let me rephrase that, AMAB clients and clients who were raised as boys, right? Specifically, if you were raised as a boy in purity culture, I have clients that are asexual, or maybe they're gray sexual, which is kind of arguably on the asexual spectrum. Some people say it's not, some people say it is, but like lower sex drive, right?
Yeah.
They feel like something is inherently wrong with them, that they need to be fixed. So they'll come and they'll say, like, I've had Christian couples come and they'll say, we're not having enough sex. And I'll look at her and I'll say, are you comfortable with the amount of sex? How much sex would you like to be having? And she's like, well, we have sex like twice a week. I feel okay with that. And I'm like, how much sex would you like to be having? And he's like, honestly, I feel like 2 times a week is too much. I could maybe have sex like once a month or like once every other and I'm fine. Yeah. But like, I feel like I have to do it, right? Because also the number one number that is most prevalent in all Christian marriage books is 72 hours. You have to have sex every 72 hours.
No, I heard this. We were talking about it in my chat the other day, not in Discord, but in another group. And somebody said, I was raised with the belief that you have to have sex every 72 hours or else the man will be like,
will stray
in spiritual pain, or like, someone was taught, like, specifically that like there would be an actual like dysfunction issue, like a genital dysfunction issue if you didn't expel every 72 hours. And I was like, I've never heard this. And they're like, oh, really? They're like, it's really common in most denominations. I was like,
yep. Love and Respect is like one of the number one selling marriage books of all time, not Christian marriage books. Love and Respect is one of the top selling marriage books. And it says that in there, that you have to, like, men need this sexual release and they can't go without it. And so if you believe that you have to have sex every 72 hours, but as a man, you're asexual and you're forcing yourself to have sex with your wife every, twice a week, we'll say. So that's like about every 72 hours, a little bit less sometimes. you feel like you're not performing your marital duty. She's over here like, I'm totally fine. And he's over here like, I don't even want to do this. And something's wrong with me. Fix
Yeah.
me. Something's wrong with me. And you're like, hey, I don't think, good news, I don't think anything's wrong with you. Bad news is you believe something's wrong with you, right?
Yes.
Good news is you're profoundly normal, right? So you really have to unpack that, and you have to determine what's trauma, what's asexuality, where's this authentic person, right? Where's your authentic sexual expression?
Yeah. And I think the way that's a really good way to say it. The way you put it, where's your authentic sexual expression, is a good way to put that. Especially because once you realize, I think, and I don't know if enough people do that sort of deep dive thinking, when it comes to a relationship, I feel there's almost never going to be a time when you're both 100% on the same level. Someone's sex drive is always going to be higher. Someone's is always going to be lower. You're always going to like slightly different things in terms of erogenous zones or how you respond. Maybe you like having sex at night. Maybe you like sex in the morning. Like, no matter what there is, there's so many variables to sex that when you are with a partner, you're never going to be on the same page all the time. And so I think that it is so weird that they're pushing this 72-hour thing, for example, where they're saying this is how much you should be having. And that doesn't even make sense, because like you're saying, then something's wrong with you. Even if you did have a sex drive that is considered allosexual, the fact that you're put onto a schedule from some person who wrote a book when maybe you only like sex after you eat turkey or something, like there's more variables than that. Just a time clock. It's so frustrating to me. And people don't stop to think about it, I guess, which is unhealthy for a sex life.
Well, and just like what you said, you're like, people don't stop to think about it. So that's one of the things that you do in therapy. You're like, let's unpack this. Let's really dive into this and think about this. And you talk about like, so where in the Bible does God say 72 hours? Like, show me where in the Bible this 72-hour mark is being made, right? And like, they can't. They know they can't. They know that it's not there. They're like, unless it's in some like, the Ephesians that I never read in my life. I have no idea. So people can't find it, right? And they recognize once you start to unpack this, they're like, no, it's really not. Well, then who made it up? It's not in the Bible. Someone made it up. And then you start to unpack it, and you bring them to this understanding that it was men who wanted power over what they saw as their women, right? Because you're a possession. And they wanted to be able to have an excuse to do this or whatever. So like it literally
and
is
especially just one or two men's design. Again, like if it was a different author, whoever came up with the idea, it could have been once a week. It could have been, it's somebody decided this is how much I want to have sex, and then made it a mold to put onto every other man out there and said, unless you have, a sex drive at least every 72 hours like me, you're wrong. It's bizarre.
Yeah. We know where it comes from. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but if you trace it back, you can trace it back. There's one Christian marriage book that was published in like, I think the 80s. And they're the first ones. That's the first time you ever see this 72-hour rule. Well, when did purity culture start to come about? In the 80s. So right around the time of True Love Waits and all of that stuff coming out, this Christian marriage book was written. It said 72 hours. We've now had multiple Christian marriage books since then. It's never mentioned until the 1980s when purity culture is brought about.
I hate it. I hate it so much. So as you were working in your practice, right? Well, I guess this would get more into like the clinical study part of it. What do you think the future of American young adult teenage boys is? Because I feel like as this almost counterculture of people are pushing back against queer identities, against trans identities, the whole super straights of the world, as these men are becoming more radicalized, what do you think the path forward looks like to avoid the like incel territory? Because I think incels are extremely close to the same exact thing we're talking about with compulsory heterosexuality, because they feel that they deserve a certain amount of sex, and that if they're not having X amount of sex, then women are the enemy. And I think that's very closely tied to the idea that there's this right amount of sex and that it's owed to them. And unfortunately, it's tied to the radicalization of these young teenagers, the alt-right pipeline on YouTube, the Tate Bros of the world. So how do we start having a public and like maybe media-centered conversation to not allow incels to keep on getting born? I don't know how to phrase that.
No, it's a good question. And so my research area, right, is usually misogyny in the US, which abortion care falls really heavily under. And it just happens to be something that has been exploding in the last year. But the Manosphere is definitely something that I've been very involved in studying with other colleagues and stuff. And that's sort of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to explain it really quickly because number one, if we have parents watching, I want you to be able to identify this stuff in your young boys. And number two, if you understand the lens through which they're looking, you can speak to it better. So the Manosphere is this big bubble. And I tell people to imagine them like Venn diagram circles that are all overlapping each other, right? So there's 4 circles, we have them in a line and they all kind of overlap at different times. They share a lot of the same stuff, right? So if we take these circles and we then stack them in like a 2x2 square, right? There's going to be a lot of overlap. So there's 4 main categories. Most researchers, we recognize 4 main categories in the Manosphere. One of them is incels, which is what you were talking about. It stands for involuntary celibate, which are men that believe that they're owed sex and women are supposed to be giving them sex. And women are these horrible people for not giving them the sex that they are owed. Mm-hmm. Then we have PUAs, what we call PUAs, and those are the male pickup artists. We've seen them all over TikTok, right? Like Tate's kind of a PUA. So we have him. And then we have the MGTOWs, which are the men going their own way. So that stands for men going their own way. These are men that hate feminists. They think that feminism is like the death to society. And they're saying modern women aren't good anymore. No one's like our grandma. So we're going to go our own way. We don't need women. The caveat to that being they never actually go their own damn way. Like,
I was going to say.
Like, go. No
Have
one
fun,
wants
bye.
to. Bye. But they won't. So that's the MGTOWs. And then we have the men's rights activists. The people that say like, men, like women are the privileged ones in society, men get nothing. So you can see how a lot of these people have overlaps. So how do we start having discussions about this? Well, first of all, like, of course, we know that you're never responsible for educating a grown ass man. Like they'll either want to learn or they won't. You can lead that horse to water, but you ain't going to make it drink.
Yeah.
You get to decide whether or not you want to put forth the labor of picking up that rope and leading that horse to the water. That's your choice. But when it comes to younger men and boys, when we hear them talking about this stuff, I really try to identify through which lens they're looking. Because if they didn't get it at home, if they're not getting it from their father or the men in their family, because if they are, that's kind of, a different level of it. But if they're getting it from online, if they're being radicalized online, I can almost always tell which channel, which rabbit hole they've gone down based off the words that they're saying.
Yes. They have a copy and repeat system that's built into place.
Basically.
They have like a verbal marker of who they're getting this from.
Yes. So like we can all tell when men are repeating tater tot stuff, right? Like, that's obvious. Those are our male pickup artists. And then we listen to men be like, well, men don't get child custody and women are the privileged ones. They get welfare, they get bailed out, blah, 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 blah. A lot of times those are men's rights activists. So like you can see where they're coming from and then they bleed into each other a little bit. So a lot of these like arguments, right? They have what I call a grain of truth. And that's why they end up being so believable. Mm-hmm. So like the men's rights activists will be like, well, women get custody more often. That's true. There's a grain of truth there. Mm-hmm. And also we know that happens because men don't ask for it. Men just don't ask. When they do ask, they tend to get relatively even custody. So there's that. The other side of it is that, yes, the most common custody arrangement in the US is Tuesday and every other weekend. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that, which means that dad's getting it ends up being about 2/3 to a third ish of time or something like that. It ends up being like 45%. It's not a 50-50 split.
Sure.
That is not based in misandry. It's not based in hating men. That's based in hating women.
Yeah.
Those laws, right, that these men hate, selective service, we have to sign up for the draft, the fact that we get less custody, the fact that men have to pay child support, those concepts are based in misogyny. They're based on the concept that women are less than and they're the caretakers and men can't take care of kids. So
I think that is
you're
so
mad.
important. I never even thought about framing that back to that, being like, they want the woman to do all the rearing and then you hang out with the kid on the weekends. That's what's happening here. Like, they built it so that she puts in all the work and then you can just have the emotional connection without raising them day to day. This is for you. Right. Yeah.
So you can't say the whole time that men are protectors and providers and that's what they're supposed to do and women are supposed to raise the kids. And then when you get divorced, be like, well, I don't get to see my kids. You said you weren't the one that was supposed to raise them.
Right.
Like, that was your narrative, not ours.
And so, I'd also like to see what the actual crossing over amount is between these men who are men rights activists, who are self-claimed, and they complain about this. Women have more custody. How many of them have actually ever been in a custody battle or even have a child? Because I feel like there's a good portion of people who just say things when it does not personally affect them. But that's, again, just me assuming.
Well, and I have friends, like, people will sit there and be like, you know, you don't know. I have friends that are men that got screwed in their child custody. Like, I have friends that very, like, legitly did not get a fair go in their child custody. And it was because they specifically got a judge that was a pro-mother judge. That's based in misogyny. It's based in believing that the man can't caretake for the kid as well. Right. So it has nothing to do with misandry. So, like, I'm not denying that this happens. It's a systemic issue. You're just fighting against the wrong thing. Like, I agree with you. It's a systemic issue. Help us fix it then.
Right. Right. So how, I know that you're, sorry, like, interrupted and we went on to a little thing, but, like, so there's a kernel of truth in these things. And that's why it's hard to, I hate the word, debunk them, if you will. So how do you, I don't know, start seeding truth to the youth? It rhymes. Because I think, like you said, after they're adults and they're grown men and they have made up their choices that, you know, I hate women, they're all against me, it's too late. But while they're still impressionable and falling to these alt-right channels, you said you wanted to bring up the warning signs for parents and maybe some tips on how to open up a dialogue that women aren't the enemy and it's okay to be alone and you'll find somebody if you try. Learn how to be emotionally intelligent and communicate your thoughts so you don't run people down in the streets, and then you'll probably be girlfriend material or boyfriend material or whatever.
So the one thing, and this is really hard to do because I know that when we hear our kids say these things, we want to, like, jump on it and be like, what the hell? Especially if it's not something that you're hearing your male partner repeat. Now, I will specifically say, if you're the male partner watching this and you repeat this, you probably don't care what I have to say. If you are with a male partner who says these things, start calling that stuff out. Call it out constantly and don't stop. Have private conversations with them as well. Like, pull them aside and be like, this is what you're teaching our child. Is this what you mean to teach our child when you make jokes like that?
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of asking more questions and staying curious. So, like, if I'm around a 16-year-old that makes, like, a misogynist joke, I'll be like, I don't get it. Why is that funny? And we all have heard that, right? Like, ask them why it's funny. But, like, no, really, explain yourself.
Explain it. I want to understand. I want to be in on the joke.
Right. Yeah. And so then they probably don't understand it, right? So then when you go down that path, like I've done it recently with several teenagers, you start going down that path and you're like, okay, I get it. So the premise of the joke is based on the fact that women are less than, that women are trash, like, right? And then they have to be like, okay. And then you have to stop and think it through.
Yeah.
So you ask more questions, you stay curious. If your kid is saying stuff like, you know, women don't have value. Like, if women sleep with men, they don't have value. Like, lean into that then, question that, be like, oh, that's interesting. Who told you that? Because like I don't remember me ever telling you that.
And it probably
And see
won't
where
come
it
out
goes.
as direct as that, but if you hear them being like talking, I don't know, watching a show and there's like a reality star on the show and he's like, yeah, I bet she has a high body count. Look at it, you just tell. Like it'll be something like that
Yep.
more so than I don't think women have value, because that would be a little too on the nose, I think. But same
Yeah.
thing. I bet she has a high body count just by how she acts. Something like that is the exact same thing with different words. So yeah, and then you ask them like, how does that affect your character? How does that change
Anyway.
things?
Well, and I think that you made a really good point about pointing it out in media, because I will definitely do that with kids all the time, right? And then the cool thing is when they start pointing it out themselves, they see it, right? Like,
Oh
so
yeah.
you all call out homophobia, right? You'll be like, huh? Like a character will make something, and I'll be like, ooh, I don't love that. And then the
Mm-hmm.
kiddos are like, oh, and then they have to think about what they just saw, right? They don't just get to skate by it. Or when we're watching like a movie or something, there's college kids in the movie and they say like, oh, that girl's a slut. I'll be like, do you ever notice you never hear men get called a slut? Y'all ever notice that? Y'all
Yeah,
ever like, but that's how we put women down all the time. Like start calling that stuff out when you see it in media. Make your kids start thinking about what they're seeing, because they're intaking these messages. They're little sponges. They get it, right? So talk to them about it. Question that kind of stuff.
that's
If you
it.
see sexual coercion, right? If you see sexual coercion in a movie, like a guy is pressuring a girl to have sex, which is the usual narrative that we get, talk to them about that. Do you think that's okay? Do you think that's really consent? If you have to talk someone into doing something, did they really consent to that? Have those
Exactly.
conversations.
Because like you said, it's so important because people often don't stop to think, and especially if you're young and impressionable, you can just be casually watching TV, like you said, and it's skating right past it because you don't. I mean, everyone out there has watched TV. We know how this works. You zone out, and you just let the words wash over you sometimes, and it just happens. So stopping to be like, let's have a conversation about this is huge, especially if you have a teenager. And I think we just need to be open as a whole to talking about these kind of things more. Like, I don't see compulsory heterosexuality talked about a lot on the main stage. It's talked about in my circles because I'm a gray ace, non-binary creator on TikTok who has friends who are sexologists. But like, it's not like something I turn on and I see on whatever This Is Us, you know? But yeah, I don't have kids, so it's hard for me to speak on that spot. I just hope that in the future we move away from this radicalization of sex and get back to like, it's always been radicalized. There's never been a time in human history where it's not. I was like, get back to what? It's always been bad.
We could definitely do better. Like, I definitely think we're regressing. And like when you said the stuff about compulsory heterosexuality, now that's law of the land in Florida, because DeSantis just this week extended the Don't Say Gay bill through 12th grade. So now K through 12. So like compulsory
Yeah.
heterosexuality is now becoming law in some places. So
Yeah.
we're definitely going way back instead of going forward. And we know, which is silly, we know that comprehensive sex ed instead of abstinence sex ed increases STD rates, increases teen pregnancy rates, right?
Oh yeah.
People don't
Study after
like
study after study. There's no even argument on it. It could become a law at this
consistently.
point. Yeah.
And we know that ignoring LGBTQ youth and their sexuality causes them harm. So, like, we also know on the flip side that comprehensive sex ed decreases STD rates. Teens are actually more likely to postpone having sex with comprehensive sex ed. So, you
Yes.
actually get the result that you want.
Yes. No, so true, because they realize like, oh, like say, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why you might not want to have sex, but say one of the big things is I don't want to get pregnant until I'm 30, like especially for girls who are career oriented or they have a dream and a study in mind, they want to go to college for this. And if they're like shown, like this is a real thing that can happen to you and you can get pregnant whether you're safe or not, depending on like what kind of meds you're on. And you know, like, just make sure that you're ready to, like, do this thing. They'll a lot of times choose not to. Yeah, like you're saying. Or, I mean, not the emotional part, because that's, again, purity culture trap, where it's like, you'll feel worthless. It takes out the mystery of it. It takes out the I want to say, with that mystery comes a lack of power, comes a lack of having your voice heard. And when you are more knowledgeable about sex as a younger person, you're not only looking out for what to expect, you're looking out for what to avoid. And instead of just going along with whatever a person suggests, you have more autonomy to say, I don't want to do this, actually. Yep. And I don't have to do this. I'm going to say no. I think that's all important.
It's exactly like what you said.
Want that.
No, it's exactly what you said. When we give kids information, like, it's just like informed consent when you go to the doctor. You're going to make a better choice, one that is better for you personally and for your health, if you actually have all the information. Right. Sex ed is the only place that we provide a lack of education and call it education. So when we actually give people education, for one thing, purity culture can often make girls feel like they're just a sexual toy, and they get sick of, you know, having to push these boys off, because we also tell boys it's totally normal for you to push girls' boundaries. Push them. Like, that's normal. Boys are going to push your boundaries. They're going to try to get you to do things you don't want to do. Yeah. We say sexual coercion is totally normal.
Yeah.
I've had so many women that say, like, I don't know, I just gave up and had sex with someone because I got so sick of being pressured to do it. And I just figured, like, someday someone's going to do it to me anyway.
All the time. I do that all the time, my entire life. Like, I just, to get it over with.
I guess. Yeah, exactly. Let's get it over with is the idea, right? So, like, you don't have sexual autonomy. You don't feel like you can say no. You don't understand consent. So when you own your body, right? Purity culture teaches us your body is not your own. It belongs to God, and it belongs to your future partner.
And your father sometimes.
Right? Ew. So, like, when you believe that your body is your own and you can make your own autonomous choices and you have the power and ability to do so, we find that teens actually say no more often. Weird.
Wow. How crazy. And of course, I mean, I'm not going to say all Republicans, but the Ron DeSantis's of the world would not like that to happen because, as I said, like, they want it to be regressive. They want it to be how it used to be, but in a bad way. And you always hear that argument from them. You hear it all the time. Well, in my day, we weren't taught sex ed in school. That was something that the parents would talk about, the birds and the bees. My dad would sit me down. We didn't need that to be in a school place setting, you know? And that's their excuse. But then they look how they turned out. Like, these... Yeah. Of course they don't want that, because it enables them to have the kind of power and the kind of lording over women or other types that they've been privileged to. This is how they've made their life and their career and their relationships. Of course they don't want that to go away. Like, that's their basis of their life. So of course it's threatening to teach kids how to have their own voice, even if it's not them, hopefully, going after those school kids. But again, I think if more people thought about it, I just want people to think, Danielle. That's all I want. If more people sat down and thought about it, they would realize how dumb that is.
Yeah.
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 And basically, like, that's why it all ties back into the compulsory sexuality, not even just the heterosexuality, but the fact that the end goal is get married, have kids. The end goal is, I don't know, on your first date, you should already be thinking about the third to see if you can get her to sleep with you. The end goal is, if you're going to go out to the club, make sure to try to get laid. Like, all these goals that at the end of the day, like, okay, if you did have sex after the club, like, kudos. How's that changing your life, your experiences, your happiness? Like, is it really doing anything? It's this sex on a pedestal thing that we really need to start breaking down as a culture, I think. And that's why it took me 30 years to realize I was gray sexual, is because it's just I didn't have another option for it, you know? And I almost always, when I'm in a sexual encounter, felt like, let's just get it over with. Like, I did the work to get here, to be on the date, to try to see, like, if we have chemistry. They're wanting to do it. I don't want to do it, but let's get it over with because I put in all this work. um, so, and I never would have stopped to think how weird that is until people are like, there's other options. The options aren't go out, find someone, bang, or get in a relationship, bang, or get married and bang. Like, the end goal isn't always sex, whether they tell you that or not.
Right. Well, and there's this entire concept that like that's what everyone's going for and what everyone's striving for. And like some people are, and that's great and that's fine. Some people absolutely are not, right? And we have to allow this space for like what you're talking about is what I call performative sex. A lot of people, when they come into clinical sex therapy, right? There's a clinical interview where I kind of pick apart like your sexual history. What did you learn in sex ed? What were you taught? Where were you taught it? Was sex loud in your household or was it very quiet, right? Was it something that we never talked about and it was shameful, which actually means that sex was actually kind of loud. So when we start to unpack it and we try to find someone's own individual sexual ethic and their authentic sexual expression, which means everything from like heterosexuality or not, anywhere on that spectrum, if you're gray sexual, if you're asexual, if you're poly, if you're more monogamous, if you're monogamish, right? Like we have to actually build that sexual ethic for you. And as we do that, people look back and they're like, oh, I had a lot of performative sex. I had a lot of sex that wasn't great, that I didn't really care to have, that I wasn't fully enthusiastic about having because I thought that's what was expected of me, or I thought that's what I was supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do, right? And you're like, no, nobody wants you to have performance. I want you to have good, authentic,
I want
wonderful
you
sex.
to like be happy and satisfied. The satisfaction and the release, I guess, is good for you. But oh yeah, and it goes into subcultures too, which is why I think it's amazing that you have such like a queer focused practice. Because as a gay man, we have our own set of sociological rules and societal norms, right? We have the ones that are put onto us by the hetero community as men or presenting males. And then we have the inside gay culture social norms of like, you know, sex on the first date norm. Starting out
Grindr
with
culture.
naked pictures is the norm before you even start talking. Not even having a date. Meet up for sex if you like each other, then schedule a date later. Norm. Just as many partners as you can is a norm. And so it's like, yeah. And so they need to be broken down into not just the conversation of like what's expected of you, but like you said, the performance of it. Because even if it's not being performed for a partner one-on-one, you're still doing the performance of, I am gay at a circuit party, and I'm going to find as many men as I can, because that's what is expected me of a gay man in this environment. And it does affect more than I think people think about. And yeah, I just want people to think. I have the book Ace by Angela Chin, as well as a book, God, what's it called? Something about blackness and compulsory sexuality in my reading list on Amazon storefront. Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, A Black Asexual Lens on a Sex-Obsessed Culture by Sharonda J. Brown. And so if you're interested in the topics of either asexuality or compulsory sexuality, you can read more about it there, as well as, of course, following Danielle, which you should all be doing. I have her description, or my description has her links, and you should click them. And okay, so we're about at the end. Do you have any last thoughts you wanna get out?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
We did cover a lot. I mean, we didn't cover like all the like things I really, I want to get into, which would be like, you're gonna have to come back, I think, because I want to get into gender expressions in different cultures and time. I want to get into past gender expressions, even just sexual norms and expectations in different cultures and times. Like, I mean, when I was in human sexualities, I learned about like I don't want to say it because like someone's gonna come out and be like, no, that's not how it works. You're xenophobic. But like in India, in certain areas, it's being extremely common for boys to have physical intimacy, not necessarily sex, but like, you know, holding hands, walking down the street. They have male only dances when you're a teenager, where you can bump and grind on each other. You know, kissing is normal. And you do that up until you're 18 and can get married to a woman, but it's a way of like releasing the sexual energy without losing your virginity or going after someone who's not going to be your wife. And I've always found that kind of thing fascinating, like the way that different cultures approach it. And like none of that makes you gay. You know, you could be bumping and grinding with a guy, kissing a guy. It has nothing to do with being gay. It's because you are a sexual male trying to get out that sexual desire just because you're not allowed to touch a woman yet. And so it's interesting, like if that was to ever happen in America, like you just look at a guy the wrong way and you're gay for the rest of your high school career. So it's just like interesting how these things are so like diametrically opposed. So I want to get into that with you because I'm fascinated by that stuff.
We definitely could. There's whole, like, I always think it's funny how people talk about like they're so homophobic about stuff. And I'm like, you know, back in like some ancient cultures like Greece, Roman cultures, not only was homosexuality totally normal, but like sex was for men. Sex was for you to share with other men. And women were kind of like dirty and gross. I mean, listen to the way that some of our like ancient philosophers talk about women, right? Like women were kind of dirty and gross. The only reason you had sex with them, you married them, right? But that was a social institution. That was a governmental construct. You married women and took them on and you had babies with them. That's why you had them. And then
they were a tool of reproduction.
Exactly. And so that's what bathhouses were for. Like, that's where we went. Like, you went to have sex when you wanted to actually have sex. You went and you did it with a man.
Oh, man. Hollywood Spa used to be my favorite bathhouse, and they closed in 2016, I want to say. And it was so much history there. And that's where Rock Hudson used to go, and, you know, Cary Grant. So even to this day, bathhouses are still the place to be. But there's just so few of them now because of the AIDS crisis.
There's so few. Even less after the pandemic.
Sad. And and then the pandemic took out the last remaining couple. I'm a bathhouse like connoisseur, even as I am asexual, because it fits into my specific kind of micro label, which is phrasexual. Where I'm just like, buffet, great. I don't want to like actually get down to it though. I was gonna say something at the tail end of that too, and I can't remember what it was. It was something relating to right before we got into the bathhouse part. Oh, hating. Okay, yes, looking at the old religious fathers and hating women. I think it's Tertullian who is the one that said vaginas are a portal to hell where the demons themselves live and should only be encountered within a guise of like sex. Like, don't look at it, don't touch it, procreate with it, and get out of there because it's literally hell gates. And I'm
Aristotle said horrible things. Yeah, like horrible things, right? Like the vagina has always been, it's so funny that like people talk about how weak it is. And you're like, really? Because we really empowered it. We gave it a lot of power back in the day, like negatively, right? It was always talked about very negatively, but apparently it had the power to like doom you to hell. So, I mean,
and all the weight that they put on virginity, like actual monetary worth that has been put on virginity. Like, obviously, you think it has some kind of special power. And when it's been touched, it loses that. You still see it today with the body count discussion of teenage boys. Like, having one partner versus 5 is somehow
a thing.
Even though we
don't
still
virginity test girls today. So
do we really?
Yeah, it's legal in all 50 states. It absolutely is.
Like the parents do it? The parents are curious, or like what's the purpose of that?
You almost always hear about it happening behind like a white evangelical Christian family, a Catholic family, sometimes a Muslim family. It crosses over in some other cultures as well, but that's generally like the main theme of it. And we cannot tell. I've been asked, like, can you virginity test people before? There's no clinical way to prove virginity. I cannot prove virginity with a
No.
pelvic exam or anything like that. We still to this day provide, like, it is legal in all 50 states. Some OBGYNs provide them, and some OBGYNs will give you a certificate of virginity to present to your future husband.
No.
They will
That is
certify you.
horrendous.
It's so bad.
I did not know this. This is gonna like haunt me. I'm gonna do research on this now just 'cause it's freaking weird. America, dude. I hate the whole
America.
country, man. You're the worst, man.
It's the bad place.
It is the bad place. Yes. we can change it. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just gonna keep having the conversations that I think need to be had and see what happens. That's all I can do. So I want to open the audience up to a Q&A if you have a couple minutes. I'm sorry I'm keeping you a little longer than I said. We've been on about an hour. So if we can do like a 10-minute Q&A session with you, would you be open to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone in the comments, go ahead and type out if you want to send anything. I have a couple things I want to throw up onto the screen while we're waiting for that. So first I want to say thank you to Nope Ninja for the super chat. And I love the cat. And then this is, I think, when we were talking about where in the Bible does it show that 72 hours thing. And I thought this was funny. Jose says it's in Patriarchy chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. At least he knows.
I know that book well. Yeah.
And also from Jose, Dr. Kramer is a wealth of knowledge. And they want to say thank you because you're learning so much. And Nope Ninja. This one we were talking about incels, I believe. And it said, I think it's kind of like linked to not encouraging compassion to others. Manly men are supposed to not have emotional needs. So the only way to express any feelings is through sex. Yes, I can agree with that.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that.
Especially when it's a relationship need, and instead of trying to show your love, I mean, love languages are kind of bold, right? But like, as it's proposed in the relationship, if you're trying to show your partner you love them or you're even frustrated with them, sex is used as a communication tool for a lot of men who can't communicate their feelings. They do that through desire. They do that through cheating. Instead of saying, I'm unhappy in this relationship, let's work on this, this, and that, they cheat and they blame it on biology. When in reality, they were just having unhappy feelings at home. So yeah, I can agree with that for sure. Oh, hi Titan, you're late. We're about to wrap up, but hi. Let's see if we have questions. Actual question for Danielle. What are some interesting things that LGBTQ folks or couples talk to you about?
Ooh. So I have a lot of queer couples, and I love, love, love working with queer couples. So one of the things that I do a lot that I specialize in therapy is opening the relationship. So I have a lot of queer couples that will come to me and the relationship was closed. They've been monogamous for however long, usually several years. And they're looking at opening the relationship. One or both partners have realized that they're poly or that they would like to explore that. I call it, there's like a poly by orientation and a poly by lifestyle. Orientation being like, I feel like I need this. This is a need for me to feel fulfilled. By lifestyle, meaning like this is fun. So we work on opening that a lot. I have a lot of people that are gender diverse. So learning how to have sex that feels authentic to you, that feels affirming to you, that affirms your gender identity and gender expression. So we play with different ways to do that. I have a lot of people that are gender diverse that are going through hormones or they've gone through surgeries like orchiectomies, removing the testicles. Maybe they've had like a complete, like sometimes they do surgery packages, right? So they'll have multiple different surgeries done at once. That changes your body. And so you try to learn how, like, what's going to feel good now. Like nerves might act a little bit differently depending on, you know, did you have surgery on your chest? Did you have surgery on your genitals? Things react differently as those nerves are regenerating. And so we look at different ways for you to have pleasurable and affirming sex while your body's going through these different changes. And then also just general things that a lot of people come to sex therapy for, right? Like maybe you grew up in purity culture and like you're still, even though you're out and you're in a queer relationship, maybe you still have a lot of those old sexual scripts that you're struggling with. And so we unpack those.
Unpack everything.
Everything.
I think that's great. And like you said, I never even considered like polyamory to be within a sexual orientation until recently when we were on a live stream. Actually, we were doing like a queer panel thing, and someone was talking about how they were in a relationship that was poly. And I don't remember what the question was. Somebody was like, is that like, I guess, a lifestyle choice, or was that like something that you were driven to do? And it was something that I never thought about, and then I like clicked into my head, and I was like, no, like by nature, I am polyamorous. Like I remember the first thing I did before I even got into my first long-term relationship with my boyfriend, before we officially started dating, I was like, here is my terms. I want this to be seeking a throuple kind of situation, and I want it to be in a kind of closed polycule, not just open, but like I'm looking to have another man come in before we even started dating. I'm like, if you're cool with that, then we can date. If not, then not. So I was like, that was always the goal in my long-term relationship. And then it worked out that he lied and said he'd be totally down, and a month into dating other men, he was out. So and then we still stayed together for 3 years, but it felt wrong because it wasn't what I was originally looking for. And then I was like, I think in that case, it might be a sexual orientation for me. It might be an actual thing. I was like, I never even thought about it before until that question. So I think that's interesting that you brought up unpacking that specifically. And okay, we have other questions before we get like too into the weeds. Where did I put them? Stars. Okay. Oh, here we go. How is the government justifying banning Mr. Prefer, I can never say it, the abortion pill, when it's used for miscarriages too? I'm guessing the same way they justify banning abortion, they just don't care about people's lives.
Yeah. So I've been working really heavily with that case. If you follow my TikTok, I've been working with it since before the decision actually came down. We've been waiting for this decision to come down. We thought it was going to come down in February, and then they just kind of kept pushing. Matt Kaczmarek is the judge in Texas that ruled on it. He kept pushing it down. When it was released, I immediately got a hold of his decision. It's like a 67-page document. The Comstock Act is mentioned in that document something like a ridiculous amount of times, an absolutely ridiculous amount of times. So the Comstock Act is like the 18...
Okay.
The Comstock Act? No. Nobody knows what it is, right? Because it's an 1800s act. Oh, so it's an act from, it's either 1850 or 1870. I can't quite remember which. But essentially this religious extremist went before Congress and said, look at all this pornography that they're sending in the mail. It's horrible. And it's terrible for the American moral standing. So they made it illegal to send any information that had to do with sex, reproduction, anything. That meant that you couldn't mail information about periods, about ovulation, about female reproduction. Women literally were not allowed to have information about their own bodies. The only place you could get it was from your doctor. They could give you a pamphlet on menstruation. Or the school could, right? Your school could, but you couldn't just mail that information. There was none of this happening. Yeah. So he's referencing the Comstock Act multiple times. So the question is, how can he do this? He can't. It's never been done in American history. Literally never in the history of America has a judge looked at an FDA approval of a medication and reversed it. This is the first time we are ever seeing this. And so he's referencing this Comstock Act by saying we can't send them through the mail. So he's saying you can't send them through the mail because this old Comstock Act, which we have not used in forever. And if we're using it, that means we can't send birth control in the mail.
Yeah, it's still in the mail, though. Like, not even saying that you can't get the pill from your doctor. They're focused on the mail part. But
now you can't get it.
You're going a step further than that.
So what he's doing is he's layering these things. He's layering these restrictions. So what you saw initially was about a week ago, you saw that mifepristone was going to stay on the market but there were severe restrictions in place, right?
Yeah.
That's what that was. He's layering things. So he's basically saying you can't mail it, you can't do this stuff. So, and you can't do a telehealth appointment. But then he also said that the FDA should have never approved it in the first place. They said that the FDA put it through a rushed process, approval process, which has a grain of truth, but isn't the total truth. The truth is that it was a very well-researched drug. At one point, it got pushed through an approval process a little bit faster, which they do with a lot of medications. And the reason that medications can get pushed through faster is either number one, it's severely needed in the public. It's severely needed. Think like HIV medications that got pushed through trials really quickly.
Yes.
And the other way is because we know that this is a really safe medication. This medication has been shown to be safe. So it's one of those two things, or at least the benefits outweigh the risk. Like with HIV medication, the benefits outweigh the side effects. So he's basically saying the FDA pushed this through. It's not a safe medication. This medication was approved in 2000. We've had 23 years worth of research to show that it is appropriate to use.
I was going to say, it's been out now. So even if it was rushed through the clinical trial part of it, we've seen I don't want to say repercussions because that's a negative undertone, but we've seen the results for decades now. We've seen if there was an impending danger, we would understand them.
Exactly.
And, yeah, it's a dumb argument.
So it's a terrible argument. I had to read through all 60 some pages, so you didn't have to because I'm part of committees that are working on this thing. So there's no legal argument. We've even had conservative lawyers review this, like very conservative lawyers review this, and they're like, there's no legal standing here. Like, this is the most poorly written argument. Because you do have to hire people from the other side to read it, right? To give you an opposing view. So as you sit on these committees to discuss like the appeals process that the FDA, Danco, and all these people are going through, we have to talk about these things. We have to talk about like what they're actually claiming. We have to hire people that are more conservative, that are going to try to see this the way that they see it.
Yeah.
And there's no standing. There's absolutely no standing. If they pull the medication will be completely pulled. We cannot use it for miscarriages. We can't use it for anything. The one thing I will say is mifepristone is one pill that in a 2-pill, there's more than 2 actual pills, but it's a 2 medication process. We can do what we call meso-only abortions, and those are less effective, but we can do them. I don't prefer them. They're less effective and more painful. So there will still be options, right? But they won't be great.
Yes. We'll see how it goes. I just don't like the fact that SCOTUS took over. I mean, I know that was their goal the whole time, but it'll be interesting to see what they have to say. Like, it's temporary stay, woohoo. But like, as soon as they actually make a ruling that's probably not going to be in the best of everyone's favor, the amount of precedent that's going to set for every other religious decision they have on the docket this year is terrifying. And there's a lot of them. Like, what was the last one? The last one was the guy who didn't want to work at USPS. They just heard his case on Friday. Not that he didn't want to work at the USPS, but after he'd been working there for 30 years or whatever, he decided that he wanted to be on a flexible schedule, or they wanted him to be on a flexible schedule. And he said yes. And that included working Sundays, but he's Christian. And so now he's suing the USPS for forcing him to work on the Sundays when he was there. It's just a mess. Anyway, they're gonna stack every religious argument together precedent-wise until we're just in a religious theocracy. That's what's happening. So they look separate for now, but they're not separate at all, are they? So I want to bring up Bart's question. Do you help people work through their experience of having a body that doesn't belong to themselves because they're groomed to believe that their body was for another's pleasure? Usually men.
So yes. So I'm not sure. So the question, tell me that question. Experience of having a body that doesn't.
Having a body that doesn't, like, as your body is for other people's pleasure, like you mentioned earlier. Gotcha. Your body is for other people's gain. It's not yours. It's for the receiving of things.
So I just wanted to make sure that we weren't talking about like a gender identity, gender expression thing. So when we're talking about that, That's kind of a part of that. Your body's not your own thing. So one of the things that purity culture really breeds in people, this is particularly true for LGBTQ people and for AFAB people, is a dissociation between yourself and your body, right? If you're raised as a girl, you're raised to believe that your body is sinful, it's shameful, it causes men to stumble. But also, you're not supposed to like sex. Sex is for men. You give it, they take it. They basically do sex to you, not with you. And so when you're raised with this script, you start to have a lot of that performative sex, right? But you have to almost have this dissociation between your brain and your body because you're taught that your body is so problematic. And then what we find is when people go to have sex, even if it's sex that they want to have, even if it's in a good, healthy relationship, there's this brain body disconnect.
Yeah.
Well, you can't, we call this the light switch myth. You can't flip a light switch and suddenly all this conditioning is undone, right?
Yeah.
So what we do is we start to unpack that. We unpack your sex education. Where do these messages come from? Who fed them to you? Where were they then reinforced? Either in relationships, romantic relationships, your family relationships. How were those reinforced? And then we do different somatic exercises. Somatic is like your body, right? Your senses. So we can do different somatic exercises either with a partner or by yourself. They can be very healing when they're with a partner because it can be a way for your body to receive that feedback that you can trust this touch and be present with it and it's okay. So we can do different types of somatic exercises that essentially what we're trying to do is integrate your brain and your body together so you can be present with your body. I have to get you to be present with your body in general circumstances before I can get you to be present with your body in high stakes circumstances like sex with a partner. Yeah. Right? Because there's more pressure that comes on there. So we really work on integrating that brain body connection and then baby stepping you into being safe doing that in sex with a partner or partners, plural.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay, so I want to answer Jose real quickly here. He said, do you have a website with more information? Jose, here is the link in the chat. For this is just to your link tree, but do you have like a different website you'd want to direct people to?
So my link tree is on my TikTok and my Instagram. My clinical practice should be on there, but also I practice right now. I'm accepting clients in Nebraska and Florida. I can only practice in the states that I'm licensed in. I do only telehealth only. So everything's over Zoom. You see me in your own house. This is my actual office. This is my very feminist bookshelf. So everything's online, anywhere in the state of Florida, anywhere in the state of Nebraska. And dkramercounseling.com is my actual therapy website. So you can go to there. There's a link to book an appointment with me. You can click book an appointment and it'll be sent to the appointment email address.
Rad. And yeah, you have so in that link tree, there's so much information between like the birth control fight and how you can get involved or questions you may have. It's all nicely listed there. A lot of resources. So thank you for putting that together.
I'll also remind people really quick on that link tree. There's a link to order abortion pills, which you can still order now, even if you don't need them right now. So.
And if I'm not mistaken, so can AMAB people order them, if that's correct. Is that correct? They don't.
Yes, anybody can order. Correct. No prescription.
So you can save them for later, save them for a friend, save them for a future girlfriend. Okay. And then lastly, two things, little fun things. We should turn the Hollywood Bathhouse into a museum. That's what I want to do. That is what I want to do. I've been thinking about it ever since they closed, and it's, as I haven't checked, but a couple years ago when I checked, it was sitting there empty, but I'm not in LA anymore. And it's been sitting on that plot for a while and it's just empty. And I was like, I want to take it over and reopen it. But at the very least, if I can't do that, I would like quarter off one side, half and half, maybe have like half of like a dungeon set up and then half like, right. And then half, a museum, because it's also right next to the Hollywood City Museum where they have like the Marilyn white dress and stuff. I think it would be amazing. Like, just have it turn into an entire queer history museum. Love. But I don't know how I would get investors for that. I'm not very business minded. So hopefully it just doesn't get knocked down and turned into another $18 million apartment building that's all over up and down Sunset and Vine now. Okay. And then lastly, Brianna, on my side on StreamYard, I don't see a lot of what's going on over there. I just saw all these thank yous to Brianna. So I'm like putting your name up there as a call out. I had to go back to YouTube, check the live chat there, and see that you're gifting people YouTube memberships. You're amazing. That's so sweet of you, and you're a rock star. Dope. I don't know what else to say. I was not expecting that. I didn't even know you could do that. So like, yay, that's awesome. Welcome to my new members. Hi. Okay, so I think that about wraps up our question and answer. Thank you for staying over with me. Now that we're at 20, I will let you go free. I don't want to turn this into too long, even though, like I said, I would love to have you back so we can get more like anthropological. I can't speak today. That's how you know it's time to end. Anthropological and evolutionary sex studies. That way we can get more nerdy with it, because that's my favorite. And yeah, so any projects coming up? Like I said, we have the website, the resources, and your TikTok linked in the description. Is there anything that you're doing in the future you want people to know about? Brianna, thank you for the chat.
I will be, I'll definitely be at Sex Down South this year. If anyone goes to Sex Down South, it's a huge JeGaysus. You can definitely go. It's a really big, it's in the South, it's in Atlanta, and it's kind of a celebration of sexuality in the South. We do basically an entire hotel takeover. They will have real live demonstrations on stage of toys and different techniques. So like, just kind of trying to very vanilla warn you about what this conference is like.
This is not your Pride Parade event.
So it's a very big conference. I'll be there in Atlanta. That is, I think, in September. And then I'll also be at the Securing Sexuality Conference, which is up in Detroit, Michigan. That's in October. And then I've been working on this abortion case and all of the different abortion things that have been happening in Florida.
God bless you.
So just stay tuned, y'all. Like, just know that there are people behind the scenes working on that. We have been watching this case. This case has been on our radar for close to over a year now, I think, at this point. So the only thing that y'all can do, I know a lot of people are super nervous about it, and I expected to get questions about that. The only thing we can do is watch and cross our fingers and just know that behind the scenes, like, there are definitely meetings and things happening, and people are trying really hard about this.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Such a fun time to live in.
I know.
And then on my side, I will wrap that up, I guess, by saying thank you for being here. Next week, I actually finally have I don't say I'll finally have a time. I have a time already, which is super rare. I know I usually announce these things like last minute, but I have Ray coming on the show. It is going to be on Sunday, so the 30th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern. Not sure what that is in Central Time, but basically like going through some of the more extreme purity conditions that I've heard from them. Their story is going to be very interesting just based on the paragraph they gave me about how they grew up. So we will do that. Yeah, so come back next week, Sunday at 12. I'm probably going to go live tomorrow just to do another hangout with me live while I edit, if you want to join me for that. If you are listening to this on the podcast form, please go ahead and like and leave a review, because that helps for Spotify and Apple listings. If you have any questions or corrections, I know they say that on podcasts sometimes, you can email me, JeGaysus@gmail.com. And yeah, if you want to support, like I said, we have a Patreon Discord group where you can become a member of the Disciples either there or the Disciples on YouTube and join us in the Discord. I think that's everything. I always forget something, and then I'm like, oh, yes, announcement. My name is currently on TikTok .JeGaysus, because some asswipe decided that it would be a good idea to report my username and then instantly steal my username. and then not do anything with it. They're on private and they don't have any followers and they're not following anyone. They're just holding it. So for the time being, until I can keep on reporting them until they get taken down, I'm not JeGaysus everywhere. I'm JeGaysus everywhere except TikTok, where I'm period JeGaysus. But you can find me on socials there. Oh my God, it's so bad. It was back to back to back, like 4 times in 1 week. They took down my bio information, which said become a patron, inappropriate. Then they took down my username, which said JeGaysus, said like gay plus sus, inappropriate. Then they took down my username, and then they took down my username again, and it was on that second time because every 24 hours I was able to add it back. And I've had it for 3 years. It's never been a problem. They took it down for inappropriate behavior, and whoever was doing all this swiped it, but theirs isn't getting taken down. I've reported them for inappropriate username over and over
for the
and
usual
over, and nothing. I'm like, so if you thought that the username was bad, wouldn't you as a company just add it to like a no use list? If it was so against guidelines, it should be blocked off for everyone.
TikTok, though. TikTok.
Jesus Christ. I hate them.
I know.
Anyway. Okay, well, I love everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And I will see you next week. But also, I'll see you around in the comments and the Discords and tomorrow's live. And take care of each other. Be kind. Huge thank you to Dr. Kramer here. And love everybody. Thanks. Bye.